Hey Pete, how's things today? My mower won't start. You pull, and you pull, and nothing. Gas? Sorry about that. No, in the mower. Yep. If I use some ether, it fires up, runs great. Just won't start. We can fix this. Let's get it in the shop. So your Briggs and Stratton 6.5 horse with the manual primer on it won't start. It won't prime. But what's causing it? A typical complaint with these Briggs and Stratton 6.5 horse engines is it won't start. It doesn't seem to want to prime. It runs great once I get it started, but getting it started is the hard part. Well, we're going to take a look at this one here. This is on a John Deere JA65, the 6.5 horse Briggs and Stratton. It's got the manual primer pump on it, and it just doesn't prime. And so what happens is the customer brought this in, said, hey, it doesn't prime, but runs great if you can get it started. Well, what he's relying on to start this engine instead of the primer button is starting fluid, and that's not necessarily the best thing in the world for an engine either. So let's take a look at this typical problem, get at this carburetor here, and we'll take a look at the carb plate on this. Okay, to access the carburetor on here, we're going to remove the air filter. Just a standard straight edge screw on there. We'll get the filter and the cover plate off. And now you can see that we've gotten to the base plate on here. And this base plate is what gives us most of the problems. And now this is just a 5/16 inch. There's 3 5/16 inch nuts on here, or screws in here. So we can go ahead and remove these. Once we have those nuts out, or those bolts out, then there's a breather hose that hooks up onto the back of that here. And let's go over to the mock-up here, and I'll show you what's going on with this carburetor. Now I've taken the carburetor and the fuel plate off, or the backer plate for the primer bulb off, and I've put it on my little carburetor testing station here that I put together. Just kind of makes things a little easier to take a look at. Okay, as we take a look in here, I bent this this tab. I just bent that out a little bit so that we could see inside there just a little bit easier. But if you look in there, you can see there's a brass tube in the back of that carburetor throat. And when we push on the primer bulb over here on the side, that should shoot a small amount of gasoline into the throat of the carburetor. This one's not doing it, okay? And so let's take a look at some of the reasons why this may not be working. This is that carburetor plate, and so that's where I showed you through the front of that. I had the tab bent down so we could see inside the throat of the carburetor. This is the primer bulb here. There's a small vent tube in here, a hole so that it can you can get pressure from here and blow that air pressure in through the carburetor, and then that's supposed to cause it to prime. So you can see where the primer comes in back here. Primer comes in back here. It flows through this small tube out to about right here. And then there's a small narrow channel underneath this gasket that comes out of this hole here. And that's the air passage for the air from the primer bulb to reach into the port on the carburetor that helps to push that gas up and through and into the throat of the throttle port. Now, I have heard and seen some really good ideas on how to cure this problem. This is a poor design. One of the things that we do see quite often is that these come in and they are been over torqued. They've tightened them too hard. You can see the imprint from the bolt heads here. Okay, they've actually wore down in there. They're torquing these on too tight, and what happens when they torque them on too tight, this whole head will warp, and then that's going to cause a problem if we don't have a good seal between our primer bulb, our gasket, our carburetor. It doesn't make a good seal. It doesn't allow all the air to come out of the primer, follow that channel, and out through this tube into the primer. or into the carburetor. And so some ideas that people have had is that, well, add 2 gaskets. These are just a small little gasket on here. And, you know, if we add 2 of those gaskets to it, we can increase the thickness, overall thickness of that gasket, allow us to put a little more pressure on it and seal that up around there. Okay, sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. I've even heard people say, use 3 gaskets. Sometimes that'll work, sometimes it won't. Another thing that I heard that people say is to put some RTV, and that's what I've done with this one. I've actually coated the outside of this gasket with RTV silicone so that I don't get any air leaks around there. I noticed that I see air leaks in this area, around this bolt hole, and then anywhere along the bottom, including the reference tab here, and then up around this way. So I've tried to add some RTV sealant to that to tighten this up. I've tried heating up this entire plate and take the warp out of it. I have not had any success with that. This has been a stubborn one. All these ideas usually work, 1, 2, or a combination of all 3 or 4 of them. But why this one has been so difficult, let's look at this a little closer. So as I've mentioned, we talked about the primer bulb and the backer plate and how the air from the primer bulb has to come through this channel, through this small channelized section here, and out through this port. This small air port right here matches up to this small hole right here. And what that does, that allows air pressure to enter into the carburetor, into the bowl area, and deposit a little bit of gasoline in the throat of the carburetor. It comes through this small brass tube in the back. That's not doing that on this one. This one I've tried 2 gaskets, I've tried 3 gaskets, I've used the RTV, I've tried to straighten out the warp on the head, and I just ran out of options. It hasn't worked. Now when I got this mower in, this is the carburetor that was on here. This is not an original equipment Briggs and Stratton carburetor. This is probably more than likely a cheap Amazon knockoff. Okay? And so after how many different trials and errors of trying to figure out how do I get this thing to prime, I went online onto Amazon and I went to and looked up the carburetors for this to see if I could find an original equipment carburetor for this was over $100. But I've had some pretty good luck with the HIPAA brand of carburetors. And this one is a HIPAA brand carburetor. And if we want to take just a little peek at this, and if we look at the difference, there's a small difference between these 2 carburetors. Notice the small brass insert on this carburetor. This small brass insert on that carburetor, this is right next to where the inlet for where the primer bulb goes. This one does not have that brass fitting inside that tube. And so I was wondering if that is the issue. So I went ahead, I mounted this HIPAA carburetor onto the mower, and let's go ahead and see if we can get the box back on there, and we'll see if we can get this installed. I also did order a new backer plate online for this carburetor, just to make sure that I don't have any problems with that it's not already warped or it's previously been warped. And so let's just go ahead and see if we can get this mounted on here. Okay, I'm just going to get these screws or bolts started into the carburetor for right now. Now I am just going to ever so slightly snug these up. These are the 2 bolts that go into the carburetor face itself. I'm just snugging them up. There's that 3rd bolt that we mentioned, that goes up right here. I'm going to go ahead and snug that one down a little bit because it's not directly involved with the face of the carburetor. It's not within that gasket area. And now I'm just going to go in here, and again, I'm not going to over tighten these. I just want them just snug. Hold this in place. If we over tighten it, we're going to warp that backer plate. Okay, so I've got that installed. My breather tube is hooked back up. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see this. Carburetor port. Okay, there you can see it right there. And if you watch, you can see that I am getting gas through there now. And so I can see that my throat of my carburetor is dry or is wet with gasoline. And so now it's properly priming itself. So in this situation, it really wasn't the backer plate or the gasket that was bad or the sealing. It was actually the carburetor itself. So, you know, it always looks like it's going to be such an easy fix to fix some of these things, you know, replace a gasket, add a gasket, do something like that. And sometimes we just got to sit and scratch our heads for a little while and see what it is that it's really going to take to get this running. I went ahead and reinstalled the air filter. Everything's back in place. My covers are on. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a couple of primes and let's see what happens here. Set my throttle to about halfway. And it runs. Well, Pete, we fixed your mower. Thanks. That's good. My wife's rotator cuff won't put up with much more of this.